Hailey, and today I'm going to be doing a December wrap-up. So the last time I did a wrap-up video was in October, and in that video I talked about the fact that I wanted to change my wrap-up format, where instead of doing an end-of-the-month wrap-up, I would do it for every so many books that I read, but I ended up getting really busy after that. It was November, so it was NaNoWriMo. I didn't read a lot in November at all. I think I read like 2 or 3 books. And on top of that, I was pre-filming Bookmas videos and stuff like that, so I just never ended up doing any wrap-ups at all. So what I've decided to do is this will be my last monthly wrap-up, so this is a December/November wrap-up, and then after that I'm going to do recent reads, which is where I will take every like 4 or 5 or however many books I read, I will do a wrap-up video. I hope that makes some sense, but let's just get into the books that I've read in the past couple of months. So the first book I don't actually have on me, but that is The Hazel Wood by Melissa Albert. I had an arc of it, but I have no clue where my copy went. But anyways, it follows this girl named Alice, and Alice's grandmother is this famous, or at least mildly famous, writer of fairy tales. They're very dark and weird and just strange, and she has never been able to read a copy of those fairy tales. Her mother has prevented her from doing so because her grandmother is very estranged. They don't talk to her anymore. Now, the Hazelwood is the estate that her grandmother lives on, but her grandmother ends up dying and her mother ends up going missing, and she ends up obeying her mother's golden rule, which is to never go to the Hazelwood. This was a very unique story, and I really did enjoy it. While I was reading it, I kept on thinking to myself, this should be a 5 out of 5 star read, but it wasn't though. It was 4 out of 5 stars, which isn't bad at all, but I definitely did have some issues with it, with some of the characters and their role in the story. I felt like it was a little bit predictable at times, but at the same time, it's definitely the perfect read for fall when it's rainy or storming and it's dark and gloomy. It's the perfect read for that season. Now, it's coming out in January, I believe at the end of January, so definitely check it out because I do think it's worth the read, but I really do have very mixed feelings on it. After that, I picked up Book of a Thousand Days by Shannon Hale. This is the first Shannon Hale book that I read, and I loved it. Shannon Hale has been writing YA books and all sorts of other books for a very long time, but I had never picked any of them up, but I was so glad that I read this book because I loved Dashti. She was an amazing character. It follows her as she is the lady-in-waiting for this princess, and they are stuck in a tower for 12 years. So everything is told in like this diary format, which I feel like you don't see a lot of in YA, which was kind of cool, and it's got like illustrations in here that she has done as well, and it definitely made me fall in love with Shannon Hale's writing. It's very medieval style fantasy, which I just love. It was classic and just very good. So I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up Worlds of Ink and Shadow by Lena Coakley. I felt like this would be the perfect read for NaNoWriMo month because it's all about the Bronte siblings who are writers, so I was like, what better to read about than writers? Now, this did start off on a strong note, but then I was kind of taken aback by the fact that it has sort of a magical element to it that I wasn't really expecting, but then I got used to it, but I felt like it didn't reach its full potential. I was kind of bored throughout the story and lost interest really quickly, so while it started off on a pretty high note, ultimately it ended up being a 3 out of 5 star read, so it was just kind of average. Next, I picked up An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. I've been seeing this all over bookish social media, mostly because this cover is absolutely gorgeous, and then also because it is compared to A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now, I will say that that comparison does make sense. However, I think the only way that they are alike is the fact that they're both based in fairy folklore. This takes place in an amazingly vivid fairy world where mortals have the ability to do crafts, basically. So our main character is a painter, and that's something that fairies are fascinated by, but they're not able to do. So she will do portraits for all these fairies all the time, and then the Autumn Prince ends up coming and she paints him, but she paints him with human sorrow in his eyes, which is a big no-no, so she ends up being captured by him, and then we have our story. I fell in love with this world. It's aptly named Whimsy because it really is whimsical, and I loved the magic, I loved the fairies, and the folklore that it was based in I felt like worked really well for this story. This is very romance heavy, and that's normally something that I kind of shy away from, but I really liked the romance. I liked the relationship a lot, and it's one of my favorite romances I've read in a long time. So I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, or a 4.5. I can't really remember. I read all these so long ago. Next, after having read Book of a Thousand Days by Shannon Hale, I decided to basically marathon her entire Books of Bayern series. So I listened to the audiobooks for all of them. I wasn't initially, but then I forget what video it was. I think it was where I hauled this, but someone commented on my video saying that the audiobooks were full cast audiobooks, and I love full cast audiobooks, so I was like, I definitely am going to go audio for these ones, and I'm so glad that I did because they were honestly amazing. The cast did such a fantastic job of bringing this story to life, and I loved all of these books. So first I read The Goose Girl, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Enna Burning, which I gave a 5 out of 5 stars. This is my favorite of the entire series. I loved it. And then I read River Secrets, which I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars, which is unfortunately my least favorite of the series, but I did still really love it. Now I did read the last book of this series, but I actually ended up finishing it in 2018, so you will see that in my recent reads video. I love the whole concept of these books with animal speaking and fire speaking. All the different kinds of speaking was so cool, and while I did really love Goose Girl, like I said, Enna Burning was my favorite. I felt like Enna was an amazing character. It got a lot darker in this second book, but that being said, the first book was still really dark. There were a few moments where my heart was literally like aching because animal things just make me really, really sad. So I still can't think about it because it makes me really sad. But this was absolutely an amazing series, and I'm so sad that it's over, but I'm so glad that I read it. Next, I read Three Sisters, Three Queens by Philippa Gregory, which I picked up entirely on a whim. I read, I think it was The Constant Princess by Philippa Gregory a while ago, and I don't even remember it, but this one intrigued me just because of the whole three sisters thing, and I love reading books about sisters, and this follows a group of sisters who one is the Queen of Scotland, one is the Queen of England, and one ends up being the Queen of France. Now, from this title, I was expecting that I would get 3 perspectives, but you don't. You only get the perspective of the Queen of Scotland. Now, for me, that's where this book really failed, because I think if this had been told in 3 perspectives, I would have really loved it, but it ended up just being okay, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. I really wanted to get the whole picture for everything, but we were only seeing things through the Queen of Scotland, Margaret's eyes, and for that reason, I felt like it was a very biased view of things, and I just didn't end up loving it as much as I think I would have if it had had 3 perspectives. Next, I read The Queen's Rising by Rebecca Ross. This is coming out February 6th, and I had heard some really good things about it. It has a beautiful cover, so I was very excited to give it a go, and it has a really cool concept. There are these different passions that people can have, and the main character, she has been working super hard for her passion because unlike other people, hers hasn't come so naturally. Now, when you're 17, you can be chosen by a patron, and you really want to be, but our main character doesn't end up getting chosen by a patron until months later when this random disgraced lord ends up coming and choosing her. I felt like the synopsis of this seemed really cool, but honestly, I was kind of just bored throughout the story. I lost interest, and I just didn't really care for the characters enough, and I felt like there was a lot of potential that wasn't quite reached. Honestly, by the last 100 pages, I ended up skim reading it because I just wanted to finish it because I didn't really have the interest in it anymore. Unfortunately, this was a 3 out of 5, maybe 2.5 out of 5 star read because it wasn't bad. I was just bored. Like, the writing was good, but I just felt like it was droning on and on, unfortunately. And the last book that I ended up reading in 2017 is The Chaos of Standing Still by Jessica Brody. I was like semi-excited for this book. I don't generally like books that are holiday themed that don't deal with Christmas, like the New Year's thing. New Year's isn't really a big thing for me. It's just kind of like whatever. But this is a book that is set on New Year's Eve when the main character is stuck in Denver airport, and she ends up accidentally swapping phones with this guy, and then they end up kindling a relationship, and it's just such a great story. I really loved it because it was much deeper than I thought it was going to be. The main character has really been struggling since the death of her best friend who died tragically in a drunk driving accident. She has survivor's guilt, and she just doesn't know how to move on because she's very much a secluded person, very shy, and likes to keep to herself, but her best friend always encouraged her to break out of her shell because her best friend was really wild and outgoing. So now without her, she's kind of floundering and doesn't know who she is anymore. This was an amazing coming of age story that dealt with tough issues head on, and I loved seeing our main character develop and grow throughout the course of the story, and I think it had a great message, and I loved it so much. Like, it's my favorite holiday book that I think I've ever read. I ended up giving it a 5 out of 5 stars. It was a great note to end the year on, and I actually ended up finishing it on New Year's Eve, so it was very apropos. So that is all for my last monthly wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you've read any of these books, please tell me your thoughts on them, or if you want to read any of them. And if you guys did enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe. I put out new videos every Monday and Thursday. And you can also follow me on my social media. I have Twitter, and my Twitter is at Hales in Bookland, and I also have Instagram, and my Instagram is at Hailey in Bookland, but all that information is down below for you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!